We're discussing some issues with regards to the prohibition of cross-dressing. That's the basic one. And Chazal said there's other things that are included in there. Just doing that which is womanlike is also forbidden. We're going to see here some sources that are disputable in that they make claims that many held of, but many didn't hold of. So we'll first see it inside. Here's the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, Yoredea, Siman Kuf Pei Bet, because we want to hear what the Shulchan Aruch had to say about the issues that we brought up in the Rambam. So I have it here. If anybody, Yoredea Kuf Pei Bet, everybody have Yoredea? Those who are with us on the computer can see it because they see my screen. But everybody else is just going to have to take my word for it, unless they want to get up and get a Shulchan Aruch. So here's how it goes. Okay, well, actually, I'm going to go back a page so we can see the entire Shulchan Aruch in one shot. Here it says, Hamavir Se'ar Beit HaShechi, someone who removes the hair of the armpit.
Could you speak a little bit louder?
Okay, I'll make it louder. Hamavir Se'ar Beit HaShechi Uveit HaErwa Afilu B'mis Parayim Ke'ein Ta'ar Hayu Makinotho Makaf Marduth. That sounds like the Rambam. It's not exactly his words. It says someone who removes his pubic hair or armpit hair, even if he uses scissors, but he completely removes it, similar to the effect of a razor, they used to lash him, rabbinic lashes. The rabbis would punish people, not lashes midoraisa, lashes for having rebelled against the words of the sages. Bamed devarim amurim, b'makom she'ein ma'avirin oto ela nashim, kedei shelo yitaken atzmo tikud nashim. Talking about a place where only women tend to shave their armpits and their pubic hair. But if it's a place where the men do it also, I can't imagine why, so they wouldn't lash him. If men do it, so they will not punish him. It does not permit this. If you live in a place where the men tend to shave their body hair in order to remove it, that does not give you a permission to do it according to this opinion. Okay? It was I heard of some people, they live down where it's hot and all that. They start shaving their chests. Can't really do that. You're not allowed to completely remove your body hair. This is just an example. It used to be apparently people were less hairy than we are nowadays also. The Gemara mentions that. It used to be Jewish women didn't have these problems. You saw the Gemara, right? Familiar with it? Okay, fine. The Rama adds, Wa'afilu chatchila sharei. Rama disagrees. L'chatchila it's mutter. Shulchan Aruch prohibits. We feel that it's permissible. Who does he quote? The Ran says that in Maseches Avodah Zarah. Rak chaverim nimnaim b'chol makom. What is a chaver? The friends. What's a chaver? A chaver means someone who holds himself. It used to be to a certain standard of ritual purity in the house, like that of a kohen. A chaver wants to be in the company of scholars and kohanim, so he has to keep his food and everything in his house on the level that kohanim have, so they can eat truma. In the Ramah's time, a chaver means generally a person who wants to be in scholarly circles among the machmirim. So you do see there's a heter here. Well, yeah. Well, what did a chaver mean back then, though? Okay, so the Talmidei Chachamim do not take advantage of this ostensible permission to shave the body hair. Umutar lavir se'ar, she'ar avirim b'misparayim b'chol makom. The rest of the avarim, you can cut it with the scissors, not with a razor, so you can, give your arms a haircut, if you will. This comes up when we make matzah. I found that, see, some hairs over here on the hand, they get dough in them. You don't want to. The dough sticks when we make the hand matzah. So right before we start matzah cooking season, I give this basically part of my hand a haircut. Okay, take out some scissors so that the hairs aren't long. Anybody here who makes matzah on a regular basis also might have that. You have to keep your nails trimmed also. You make a few batches in a row. The Shulchan Aruch continues in the next seif. Misha megaleach kol se'ar shabo meirosho vad raglav. Let's say a person were to completely shave everything from his feet till his head. like some sort of ritual purity, which they used to do to some people because the Torah says so. Who had this done to them also? And all the Levites. This was the initiation of the Levites. The Kohanim had a long 7-day process of bringing certain sacrifices and staying in the courtyard of the tabernacle. And the Levites had to completely shave themselves from top to bottom and then get waved by Aharon. That's mentioned in Baaloscha and other places. And that the Medrash connects that with Korach starting to make his decision that, okay, I've had enough of this. Moshe Rabbeinu had it himself had it done to him. So what does he say? There is such a case. If, for whatever reason, a person's completely shaving himself, for whatever reason, medical reason, so he can then shave his pubic hair and his armpits. That would be a permission according to Shulchan Aruch. He continues, Asur lachuch biado b'sar beit hashechi uveit arava kedei la'ashiro. The person cannot rub the hair, armpit hair and pubic hair in order to make it fall out. Aval mutar lachuch b'vigdo la'ashiro. He can use a cloth or some clothing to rub it in order to remove a hair. Wow, that's a chumrah. Mi sheyesh lo chatatin b'veit hashechi uveit arava u'mitaer mitzad hasiar mutar la'aviro. If a person has chatatin, in this case, it's boils or some other skin lesions that are actually ouchy, and he has to remove the hairs that are bothering him, he can. That's a medical reason. Sif Heg, lo ta'adeh isha adeh ha'ish, kegon shetasim birosha mitznefet o kova o tilbash shiryon v'chayot sebo. A woman should not dress like a man, so she shouldn't put on his type of turban or hat or body armor. It's not proper. Who wears an armor? Men who go off to war. Women aren't supposed to do battle. We have put up a YouTube video. Most of the rabbis have pointed out that it's taken out of context when it says that there is in the times of milchemet miswa, or as some translate chova, an obligatory war, even the groom and the bride leave their canopy to go help. It doesn't mean the bride goes off to war. It means she contributes to the war effort. That's the most makel opinion. The more machmir opinion says it means that we cancel weddings, because in context taken from the Navi, it meant that in a time of trouble, everybody has to forget what they're doing and share in the burden or share in the trouble. So weddings, they can't say, well, our wedding is happening today. So no, the bride also, they can't have their wedding. They can't say we're going to go through with it. But it doesn't literally mean that women should be chas v'shalom drafted and be serving in the army. The only permission they give for women actually to take up arms and fight is if chas v'shalom there are no men who can do so. It hasn't gotten to that yet, thank God. I know of a personal case. There was a wedding that was scheduled here in Eretz Yisrael for when? Isru Chag Sukkos. Okay? Pretty, so Baruch Hashem, they're eventually married in different circumstances, I think a week or two later. Okay, but it was a different affair than what they had planned for. It was even a question if the chassid would get to go to the wedding. Okay. Shulchan Aruch continues, the Ramah says, Mi bal b'shei ha'ish, lefi minhag hamakom ahu. It all depends, basically, what's considered men's garments, by the way. Styles change. The Shulchan Aruch says, Osha tigaleach rosha ki'ish. She gets a haircut like a man. V'lo yadeh ish adeh isha. A man should not wear the garments of a woman. Kegon shel yilbash bigdei tzivonim v'chali zahav. He shouldn't wear colorful clothing or golden necklace in this case. B'makom she'ein lovshim otam hakilim ve'ein misimim otam achali el nashim. In places where only women dress like that, or only women wear those types of garments. And I'd like to add that if you do not understand these basic norms, like, well, maybe this garment is questionable, then you might be blind. Okay? You might be blind. If you can't look at something and say, well, is this too colorful or too flamboyant for a woman? As a matter of fact, like the Rambam says, you actually have people who specialize in trying to copy feminine flamboyancy. And that's usually a bad sign. If it's approaching that, better to be machmir. Why? Because we're talking about an Isser Doraisa. Safek deraisa l'chumra. If you think that this might be too feminine to wear, then it probably is. Don't do it. The Rama adds, "Wa'afilu be'echad mina begadim asur afal pi shenikarim bishar bigdehem shehu isha isha." Just one garment. Let's say the guy's he's totally a man. He's wearing a black Armani suit and a black tie and some nice and a Borsellino hat and some nice shoes. He looks perfect, but he's going to have I don't know. Well, he's going to wear a purse. Okay, just a woman's purse. Okay, an obvious purse. He can't do that. Okay? Even if it's obvious, he's not trying to, get himself into, a place where he could, I don't know, where only the women are allowed. That's what the Rambam says. They do this for admittance to places where men should not go. So you can't do that. He continues.
That's
Well,
that's a big one.
That's the Beis Yosef said this. The Ramah brings it the Beis Yosef. Is it a Dirabanan? I don't think it's a Dirabanan. I think it's trying to say the extension of the Deraisa is even if a man's fully dressed and he's not trying to imitate women, he can't take one article that belongs to women. That's what it's trying to say. And the sages, I think they have another example, like a woman should not gird herself with a sword. It's just one thing. She's totally a woman, but that sword is already too much, or just to wear a man's helmet. Tumtum androgenus asurim litatef ki isha. What about tumtum androgenus? That's a good question. How if a person is a hermaphrodite or he is unknown, like a tumtum androgenus, how are they supposed to dress? Are they supposed to have a sign, let them wear whatever they want, but just say, I am this? So the answer is they're supposed to dress like men. What is the ostensible logic behind such a thing?
Men are robed.
Well,
Men are robed.
I don't know. Yeah. My guess was that it has to do with the prohibited bio. And that is, if you have, let's say, a relationship between an androgynous or a tumtum and another man, that is borderline homosexuality, the really forbidden kind, and that is strictly forbidden. Okay? Whereas, if you have a relationship between one of these, androgynous and tumtum, and a woman, then it's a suffix that anything bad is even happening. Why? Because only one of the partners is at least a woman. And technically speaking, women with women is not biblically prohibited as men with men. Make sense? Yeah, it's a good question. The Rambam says you can't punish women who do the thing that's called sololoth in Mishnaic Hebrew and in modern Hebrew, but it's still ro'i that women be prohibited from doing such a thing. They say it was Ma'aseh Eretz Mitzrayim, but it's not included in the list. You're not going to find in 2 weeks ago in the Parsha that a woman should not lie with another woman. It's just not in there, so it's not explicit. So it's technically not as bad as man with man, which is the worst. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch concludes. This is the last seif. Asur leish laket afilu se'ar echad lavan mitocha shechorot. Okay, a man cannot tweeze out a single white hair among his black hairs, or whatever his original hair color was. Mishum lo yubash gever. Now you understand that's his interpretation of the halacha that we saw in the Gemara. That's also as the Rambam has it. So it doesn't really leave room for dyeing the hair. If even one hair is forbidden midoraisa, then of course he shouldn't dye that hair. So he continues. It's also forbidden for a man to dye his hair, even one hair, to dye it black. That's the general color. Some people are redheads, but there it goes. That is a little bit more questionable. The Shulchan Aruch felt that way. In the olden days, it was very rare for men actually to have large mirrors like we do in every bathroom and a few places in the hallway and even in your living room. That was what did they use for mirrors in the olden days?
Metal.
Yeah. So what kind of metal? So they had if you had enough money to make yourself a silver mirror, then you were super rich. But they didn't use that. They used bronze and they highly polished it. So it was a type of thing you could hold up, and mostly women did it. Men didn't really use mirrors. Nowadays, we have much cheaper mirrors. How do we make them? They use glass, and there's this process that puts this ionized metallic stuff on the backside of the glass, and it's really super shiny. So we have perfect mirrors nowadays. So there were those who'd say that perhaps it would be permissible. Although there were great Rosh Yeshiva of the 20th century who still held like this and they never looked in a mirror. They didn't recognize themselves. I think there was who was it? Rav Ruderman thought there was a picture, he saw a picture of himself and he thought it was someone else. And he didn't recognize himself. And as you know, at least in this young Israel, we have mirrors in the men's room, right? But you go to a proper Haredi shul or yeshiva, and what don't they have? Mirrors. Okay. Rav Avi was saying that the problem with men being clean shaven all year round is that in order to maintain that look, they have to spend a lot of time in front of a mirror on a daily basis. Whereas if a person just lets his beard grow, he'll spend a lot less time grooming himself. And by extension, he'll spend a lot less time staring in front of a mirror. If you have more trimmed beard, you look in the mirror once every Erev Shabbos and touch up your mustache and shave here and all that, and that's it. But if you want to keep yourself clean shaven, you're going to spend a lot more time in front of the mirror. So he recommends just grow a nice big beard and you won't have to worry about anything. And every now and then you'll go to the barber for a haircut, but that's the barber's problem. You won't have to cut yourself. What's the question? No?
I'm trying to think about the gradations here.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that men cannot use beards?
No, I'm saying that Shulchan Aruch didn't like it. And we just read in the Shulchan Aruch.
To say that. So since the time of the Shulchan Aruch, all the other things that you said prior to that are saying that it's all relative to the place. It's relative to what women do, and men are not allowed to do what women do. The principle, I have no problem at all.
Okay.
But what women do is a relative thing to time, to their time.
Time and place.
Time and place. And therefore, today one has to go according to the time and the place. And therefore, if men today use mirrors not in order to copy the women, but for their own, whatever reason they do it, one can't argue that it's Begadish.
Yes.
And it's in the same paragraph, it basically is the same as the coloring of the hair. So what I'm trying to get at is you can't suggest that it's an Issa D'Oraisa. Otherwise, those Rabbanim who matter dyeing the hair for social or economic reasons can't do it. You can't do away with Issa D'Oraisa. You can reinterpret Isurim Rabbanim and say that whereas it wasn't permitted to dye your hair back then, people didn't do it at all. Nowadays, it's less of a problem, and especially if you have a good reason for it.
Okay, so my response is that perhaps we should have prepared an entire share about this. My feeling is, and what I've seen is that with regards to the prohibition of cross-dressing, there is that which is D'Oraisa, and within the D'Oraisa, there is that which you cannot argue. There are also that which depends. It's highly subjective, but there's also the objective standards. So when we talked about actually dressing like a woman or wearing anything that a woman says, apparently you can't say, well, if it's a derech that the men also wear skirts and I don't know, whatever other things are particular to women. So it doesn't matter. There's certain things that even if time and place, they're not subjective. They're completely objective standards. And there are certain halachas that we saw that are entirely subjective. The only question is, we now have to figure out from the sources which of these issues are objective and which are subjective, correct?
Aren't those standards dependent on the reason?
Sometimes not. That's another important thing.
Certainly, if I have intention to dress like a woman in order to frequent places that women go to, certainly it's in this theorized. If I recall, the Ramah says you can dress as a woman or Purim.
There are people who try to permit that on Purim, and then
if I recall,
and then they said that it cannot be. So,
but he says it you want to say that you should be machmir now?
Yeah.
I have no problem.
You remember Rabbi?
Didn't even say it.
So you heard Rabbi Nadel speak about that. He probably wrote up. Oh, that was his big deal before Purim. He said he even had a big chiddush. I guess he was talking about it at the OU Center then. Well, I was looking at his sources. He has his own interesting, almost unique thesis regarding that whole cross-dressing thing. So what I'd like to say is, and this is a point that I wanted to expound upon right now, and that is, now we've introduced another factor. The first factor was, which are the objective prohibitions and which are the subjective prohibitions? The new issue is reasons. If you hold, like, let's say, the Rif and the Rambam, then the reasons are only there to help you get an understanding of the mitzvah. But the reasons are not there to help you develop a leniency. That is, it doesn't matter what reasons you could come up with. You cannot then say, Ho'il, the reason does not apply, therefore prohibition does not apply. So that's something very difficult, and that's something that I've been trying to in other categories also. That isn't the only shita, but that's one for let's say those who have an agenda with regards to Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. They want to have a purity of I guess orthodox practice. That is, we find in I actually we could spend all day doing this. Let's open up a Shulchan Aruch and Nosei Kelim. We could find that in many regards, every now and then there is an Achron or a Rishon who says the reason for this prohibition was X, Y, and Z. Therefore, reason doesn't apply. Stage 3, prohibition doesn't apply, and that's dangerous. I'll give you an example where I've seen this happen. People take the reasons that the Rambam offered, and then they come up with a new heter. And the problem is, the Rambam himself would say, you cannot do that. You can't say, well, I'm good enough, I know the reason.
The Rambam was not a Reform rabbi.
Oh, he was not a Reform rabbi?
Okay, so in the 1500s, men dressed up as women on Purim. He permitted it. So you can't, you have to therefore say that there's a reason for it. Do it intentionally in order to look like women. It's a Purim thing.
Yeah, so that's a problem. And as Rabbi Nadel, I'll explain. As Rabbi Nadel showed, I'm trying to get up his paper over here. That after those ideas like that are put out, usually the other rabbis jump on it and say, you cannot have that. There was no that perhaps there was a mechila mikvodo. He could not permit that which the Torah prohibited. Okay, it's a very tricky issue.
I accept that.
Yeah,
I don't follow the Ramah and that shita. I agree with you.
Yeah,
but he's still the Ramah.
Yes, he's still the Ramah.
And if he's the Ramah, you can't be mocha somebody else who follows the Ramah. We follow the Ramah in everything.
We
right?
do.
All of a sudden,
we do.
To make you like a follower.
Okay, well,
that bothers me even more.
I'll challenge that essential thesis that
we're getting off track.
Okay, but it's very important to know that for the last 500 years since the Ramah's times, big poskim have been disagreeing with him and trying to change things back. That's what on your idea, that's what the shach is there for.
I find it, I accept that too.
Yeah.
But it bothers me that the great rabbis won't disagree with him when he's machmir. All of a sudden he's making, we have to find the hook.
Well,
when he's machmir and everything else, we gotta follow the Ramah. Be consistent.
Okay, well, the Vilna Gaon's consistent. He disagrees with the Ramah, whether Chumrah or Kula.
I respect the Gaon more than many other great rabbis.
Yeah, so I think that with regards to these things, you should stick with the Vilna Gaon, who didn't accept any of these permissions. There's a Gemara about this. The Gemara talks about who was the great man who looked at a prohibition, discerned the reason for the prohibition, said that the reason does not apply, and therefore violated the prohibition. It was Shlomo HaMelech. So we try to avoid these things. I'm trying to keep a list. Maybe I'll make this a book, but it's not the type of book I want to put out because I have different interests. A book of a list of halachas that for which people have discerned reasons and then declared that the reason does not necessarily apply. One of them is going to become relevant. The whole issue I think I told you about growing payas, kohanim with payas. You're not allowed to enter the azara if you're a kohen with hair longer than 30 days growth. That applies to the hair of the head. So that means the kohanim used to get the equivalent of buzz cuts. But nowadays, since the times of the Ari, it's become the style of those who are pious to exaggerate the length of their payas. Piety, payas, milashon pious. Okay, it's an act of piety to have long payas, and that, like I tell every Kohen I meet, oh, when are you going to shave off your payas? Because if you want to serve in the temple, you cannot have long payas.
What's that based
It's a prohibition. It's an explicit prohibition in the Torah. It's in this week's parsha, actually. Okay, last week's part we just read it. So the Kohanim are not allowed to serve in the temple drunk, okay, after having drank revius of wine, or with longer than 30 days growth. What's the minimum of a Nazir? 30 days growth, the maximum of a Kohen. So lo and behold, you have especially Hasidic type rabbis today who are trying to find heterim, God willing, when the temple service is reinstituted speedily in our days already today, all these Kohanim will be allowed to keep their payas. And they latch on to a Rambam who says that a regular person, even when going to the temple, should get himself a short haircut. But if his hair is longer than 30 days growth, but he styles it properly, that's considered good enough for this ordinary person, a non-Kohen, to enter the temple. So they'll say, it must be the only reason in Torah's prohibition of Kohanim having long hair is cool aspect. It looks sloppy, but if the Kohen can style his hair before entering the temple, and even if it's long, it should be allowed. And of course, everybody has payas, and that looks quite Jewish and neat. So yeah, I think that the heter is
I have an appointment at Bochetta there for exercise. Are you available or?
Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. There you
I
go.
mean, if you are, otherwise we'll take a cab. It's no problem.
I don't want to stop this. Hold on. We're going to try to ask everybody to mute themselves. Okay.
Not talking to you?
I don't think so. They're just talking about their exercise. Okay. Let's get back to the Gemara, but there's one more thing that, because we have it, we have the Vilna going on this issue. We have here a tshuva that brings the sources of those who allowed dyeing the hair. And as I said, you have this radiation, even others who came before him, who gave a permission to people to dye their hair because of the shame aspect. But once again, that relies on first making the decision to say that the reason for these prohibitions is X, Y, and Z, ingratiating oneself with the opposite sex or trying to look feminine. But if one were to dye his hair in order not to look feminine, but to look masculine, so that might be a permission. The problem was Chazal didn't say that in our Gemara. It seems to be, at least according to some Rishonim, that when Chazal say that a man should not remove his white hairs tweeze out the white hairs among the black hairs, or to dye his hair, this is one of those objective prohibitions. It was understood to them, a tradition, to be objectively always understood that men should not be coloring their hair. Okay. I know fellas who actually do color their hair all the time. And that's almost a joke because they're grandfathers. There's a guy who's white as a ghost for a few months, just didn't get around to it. And then suddenly before Pesach, not a single white hair left on his head. Okay. And I don't know who he's fooling. Two, I don't see it. Maybe if he started 40 years ago when he was in his 20s, so he had the permission of this radiation, others. But like I said, if you're a grandfather and you're pushing 70, there's no longer such a thing. So that's a problem.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.